If miniaturization came from Japan and everything's bigger in Texas, then how do you explain this? Hey there friends, welcome back to the channel. My name's Alex Lokes and today I have another camera review for you. The lovingly nicknamed Texas Leica, or as it's officially called, the GSW690II. Now, many cameras of this type were assigned really the moniker of Texas Leica, mostly because they are massive medium format rangefinders that have formats such as 6x7, 6x8, and 6x9. The one that I'm reviewing today is one of the 6x9 cameras. So before we get to the shooting, let's take a step back in time and review the history of this lovely camera. Like all mid-century Fuji medium format rangefinders, the GSW690II traces its history to the increase in the tourism industry. The original two cameras were set up to either take 6x7 or 6x9 negatives. Lead designer Yamamoto Katsuku decided to look at two separate camera systems to develop the functional design choices. The first was the Graflex Combat Graphic, a camera specifically designed to take 70mm film, and a rangefinder. The second is, of course, the Leica M series. The idea was to create a rangefinder with the ease of the Leica, but combines the power and image size of medium format film. The original two medium formats interchangeable lens rangefinders came out in the GM670 and the G690. While the 6x7 cameras were aimed at print applications, the 6x9 would be for tour operators to take the group photos, thanks to the sizable 6x9 negatives. Also, only shooting 8 frames, there could be a quick turnaround on the images. Initially released in 1968, the G690 came with 4 lens options: 65mm, 100mm, 150mm, and 180mm. While most cameras of the rangefinder type had the shutter as part of the camera body, Fuji placed a leaf shutter, made by Seiko, in the lens. To change out the lens, the photographer had to close the shutter to prevent accidental exposure of the film. Fuji released a minor update in 1969, the G690BL, which included an interlock to prevent the photographer from removing the lens without first closing this protective shutter. Fuji also re-released all 4 original lenses, but in a black finish. Fuji continued to improve on its design and in 1974 released the GL690. Fuji improved the lens mount, viewfinder, and added a front-mounted shutter release. Fuji also released all new lenses with improved rubberized focusing rings and added a 50mm lens. They also developed a 100mm lens with a semi-automatic exposure system. While the interchangeable lens camera was continued in 1979, Fuji released a more budget-friendly fixed lens copy, the GW690, with a 90mm f3.5 lens, and the GSW690 with a 65mm f3.5 lens. Both cameras lacked any internal meter, and a simple accessory, cold shoe, and an odometer that counts the shutter releases to help photographers know when they have to have the camera serviced. Users complained about the lack of bulb mode on the shutter. There was a time mode, and the noise generated by the odometer and that shutter. It wouldn't be until 1985 that Fuji released the updated GW690II and GSW690II. Both cameras were almost the same as the original model, but the hand grip had changed from a simple groove to a checked pattern. The branding of Fujiko was dropped in favor of simple Fujifilm, and 2 sets of strap lugs and a hot shoe were added. The odometer and shutter mechanisms were made slightly more silent, and production continued until 1995 when Fuji released the GW693 and the GSW693. This completely overhauled the body design. So let's take a closer look at the Texas Leica. And here the beast is. The camera itself is fairly simple, but has all the right controls in all the right places. So starting here at the front, you have the lovely 65mm lens, and because the shutter is integrated into it, you actually have your shutter speed and your aperture controls here, and these are controlled by a pair of these levers here will control the aperture, while the smoother moving ring will control your shutter speed. And there is actually a decent amount of click. You have a nice, smooth focusing ring here and an integrated lens hood. So on the front, you actually have a shutter lock and a secondary shutter release, and it's simply here, L for lock, red for active. Up on the top, you have your shutter release button with a standard mechanical release and your film winding lever and a hot shoe and your frame counter. But what makes this really interesting is that you actually have your frame counter settings. You have a choice of a 4 exposure 120 roll, so that would be like 020 or something. I don't know. I've never seen a four frame roll of a short roll of 120. You have your standard 8 exposures on 120 film, or you can get 16 frames on 220. So if you've backed the Cinestill 400D in 220, and indeed it has gone through, you can actually shoot 220 film natively in your GSW690II. On the back, you have your viewfinder and you have a film memo. And on the bottom, you have a standard tripod socket. There's that odometer, and these are releases for the spools inside and your frame, your back opening. So here in the back, you actually have your pressure plate, and you simply press it down and slide it to one side, and you can actually remove it, flip it around, and it's good for the 220. And here in the back, you have that giant 6x9 frame and your 2 spools. So why don't we actually get this thing loaded and we can head out into the field. Okay, with that taken care of, we can actually now get out into the field and shooting. So today I'm shooting 2 rolls of Kodak Plus X pan, and I'll be developing that in Legacy Pro L110 here at 2 rather nice parks that are great for landscape photography here in Oakville. Okay, so I'll see you at our first stop, Pondview Park. Despite its size, the GSW690II is a camera that I could probably carry around all day without too much trouble. The only place it takes up room is in your camera bag. The one thing that can be an issue is loading the film. Make sure that your start arrows are aligned with a pair of easily missed red dots on the opposite side of the exposure window. Once there, it takes a couple of full pulls and then a quarter pull to get it aligned, and then you close up the back, and thankfully from there you have automatic frame advance. Now, it is a double stroke for the film advance lever pull, but you know what? That's better than having a single 180 degree. The camera itself is actually quite fun to use. The viewfinder is big, bright, and has wonderful, easy to read frame lines to help with composition. And the rangefinder patch is big and has excellent contrast. Combine that with a beautiful large focusing ring, and you're in the game. The one thing that I did find troublesome with the camera is composing in the 6x9 format, but then again, when you're used to things like 645 and 6x6, going something that large can be a bit of an issue. Another thing that could be an issue to some people is exposure. There is no internal light meter, so you're stuck with Sunny 16 or carrying an external meter. Now, something like Raveni's lab meter on the hot shoe would be perfect, or their spot meter if you want something a little more compact and accurate.
Well, there we go. First roll done. So I will see you tomorrow where we're going to talk a little bit more about the optics of this camera. All right? You know, there's always a certain bittersweetness about shooting the last roll of something you have, and that's the case right now with my last roll of Plus X. I'm sure I'll find some more eventually, but it's totally worth it to show off the beautiful optics of the GSW690II. Let's walk.
I've never met a Fujinon lens that I didn't like, and the Fujinon on the front of the GSW690II is no different. The one thing you need to really think about with the optics on this camera is think about it like a 4x5 lens. It's a 65mm 6 elements and 4 groups lens. Now, that may not seem too wide for you, but remember you're working with 6x9, so that gives you about the equivalent of a 28mm lens on your 35mm camera. Now, not ultra wide, but perfect for this camera. And the f5.6 might seem a little bit slow, but this is not a lens that you use to get those creamy out of focus areas, although apparently it does have a lovely bokeh. But you have to get in real close and focus in really close, in which case you're wasting the potential of this camera. The 28mm or wide angle lens gives you the ability to shoot handheld down to 1/30th of a second if you're steady, without too much camera shake, and gives an excellent field of view for that big 6x9 negative. But the one nice thing is that the camera is sharp at any aperture. I've shot it down to f5.6 and up to f32 and have never had any issue. There's no distortion, no vignetting, and everything is just tack sharp, especially when you pair it with a sharp film and a sharp developer. The one thing that it does suffer from is a bit of flare, but you have an integrated lens hood that does a wonderful job in keeping that down.
And there we have it, 8 frames. This is a fun camera, I will admit, but it's just not my style. First of all, I'm not a rangefinder person, but this is a rangefinder I could get behind. And 6x9, I don't know. I don't really feel at home in that format. Compositions are difficult. Personally, I would go with a 6x7 camera before I went with the 690. And there's the rub. These cameras are not cheap. They're relatively rare. You really can only find them in Japan, and that's where you buy them from. The original model GSW690, you're looking at $600 to $800. The twos are $800 to $1,500 on the top end, and don't even get me started with the 3 models. Those are close to $2,000 and up on eBay. But if it's your jam, then yeah, it's totally worth it. The trouble is that I would love to get a fixed lens 6x7 rangefinder from Fuji. Those are even more of a unicorn, and even the original models are $1,000 and up, if you can even find them. But what about you? Have you used the 690 series? Do you prefer the older interchangeable versions? Do you prefer the normal focal length? Are you an original, a 2, or a 3? Let me know in the comments below. As always, if you want to see more from me, give me a like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification icon, especially if you're new to the channel. And as always, my name's Alex Laux. Get out there, stay safe, wine me, dine me. Well, you know the rest.